So namaste and welcome to our satsang this morning. I am very happy that you've all joined with us. In this series, and this is the third one that I am offering, I am meditating deeply on significant verses from Hindu sacred texts. I am calling this series Meditations on Hindu Texts because I come to this satsang as a religious practice. Each verse is transformative. Each verse offers both a deep theological or spiritual insight, as well as what this insight means for our lives in the world. This is my focus, and this is my offering in these series of meditations. So we started with the opening verse of Kaṭha Upanishad. You will remember this. All that exists in this world of change is covered by God. Ishavasyam idam sarvam. Give up and enjoy. Tena tyaktena bhunjita. Do not covet anyone's wealth. Ma grida kasyas vidhanam. And then we move to the 6th verse of Kaṭha Upanishad. One who sees all beings in Brahman, in Atman, and Atman, Brahman in all beings, does not hate anyone, is loving towards all. Yastu sarvani bhutani atmanyevanupashyati sarvabhuteshu chatmanam tatona vijugupsate. So today, our verse for meditation is taken from Katha Upanishad. And this is from the first chapter of Katha Upanishad, the second section, first chapter, second section, verse 2. Sreyascha preyascha manushyam etastau samparitya vivinakti dhiraha sreyo hi dhiro abhiprayaso vrinite preyo mande yogakshemad vrinite. I translate very, very briefly, and then we will discuss. Both the good and the pleasant approach the human being. The thoughtful person examines and distinguishes them. The thoughtful person prefers the good to the pleasant. The thoughtless chooses the pleasant for the sake of acquiring and preserving wealth. So let me begin with a short background to this verse and to the Upanishad. The Katha Upanishad, as I'm sure many of you know, is a dialogue between the youthful student Nachiketa and his teacher Yama. Like all Upanishads, dialogue between student and teacher. Nachiketa, though very young, is an exceptional young person. He had a deep thirst for knowledge, for spiritual wisdom. And in the Upanishads, this thirst, this desire to learn is expressed in different questions that are asked by students to their teachers. In the Prashna Upanishad, for example, the student asks the teacher, from where do all beings originate? What is the source of all life? In the Kena Upanishad, the student asks about the nature of that reality because of which we think, we see, we hear, we speak, we touch. In the Kaṭha Upanishad, from which the verse today comes, The question is about the continuity of life after death. This is what this entire Upanishad is all about. So Nachiketa asked his teacher Yama, there is this doubt about a person who has died. Some say he exists. Some say he does not exist. I want to know the truth of this. Please teach me. His teacher Yama wanted to be sure that his young student was serious about his interest in spirituality, and that this interest was not a frivolous one, it was not a transient one. If Nachiketas is not properly motivated, he will not consider, he will not be attentive as a student, and he will not consider deeply Yama's teachings. Questions are not always asked in these contexts because of a deep or a depth of interest. So Yama, in order to ascertain, to establish Nachiketa's seriousness as a student, Yama offered him some alternatives. In other words, I don't have to answer your questions, but if you want these things, I can give to you. So he offered him wealth. He offered him a long life. He offered him power in the world. And he said to him, choose children and grandchildren who would live 100 years, family in abundance. Choose plenty of livestock and elephants, horses, and gold. Choose power, a wide domain, a wide expanse of earth, and you can live as many years as you wish. You can live as many autumns as you wish. This is what Yama offered to him. The young Nachiketa, as I said, was exceptional. And he would not be tempted. He resisted the temptations of his teacher with very famous words, and I will return to these words. He said, my dear teacher, human beings cannot be satisfied with wealth alone. Human beings cannot be satisfied with wealth alone. In Sanskrit, na vittena tarpaniyo manushyo. Na vittena tarpaniyo manushyo. We yearn for something that wealth does not satisfy. We have needs that are much deeper and go beyond wealth. So it is in this context that the teacher spoke the words that I bring to you in our conversation today. Sreyascha preyascha manushyam etastau samparitya vivinakti dhiraha Sreyo hi dhiro abhiprayaso vrinite preyo mande yoga kshemad vrinite. And these are the two key words for our conversation today. Sreyas and preyas. These are the words used by the teacher in this verse. Sreyas and preyas offer themselves to us as choices. The thoughtful human being carefully considers both and chooses Sreyas above preyas. The thoughtless person chooses preyas for the sake of acquiring and preserving wealth. So the two key terms in this verse are, as I said, Sreyas and preyas. And the Upanishad is commending Sreyas as the higher of the two pursuits, the higher of the two goals. So let us examine further. What do these words mean? Prayas is translated in many ways. It's translated as the pleasant, the pleasurable, the gratifying. It comes from the root pri, P-R-I, which is familiar. We have many derivatives from that root pri, priya, priyam, and so on, also come from the same root. Pri as a root means to delight, to bring joy, to gratify. So prayers includes all those things that we need as human beings for a decent and comfortable life, a pleasant life in this world. What do we need? We need nutritious food. We need adequate shelter. We need appropriate clothing. We need access to good health care. We need education. We need good work. All of these come under the umbrella, under the category of prayers. And the Upanishad does not condemn prayers, and we should not. So I want to make that very clear. The text does not condemn prayers, and we should not. Prayers makes a good life in the world possible. Life is miserable when we lack prayers, food, healthcare, access to education, when we have no time for leisure even. And let me note, having said that it is a sad fact that we live in a world where too many still lack these resources, still lack prayers, the necessities that make for a good life. In spite of significant progress across our world in attaining prayers, 820 million people are subject to hunger. 6 million children die each year before their 5th birthday because of lack of health care and proper nutrition. 6 million children die. And 6 out of every 10 children lack proficiency, basic proficiency in reading and mathematics. These figures should concern us all. Too many of our fellow human beings are constrained to spend most of their energies in the acquisition of prayers, leaving little time for anything else. And we must acknowledge and be concerned about this fact. Katha Upanishad does not disagree with this truth. What this Kaṭha Upanishad verse aims to do is to draw our attention to the limits of a life that is exclusively devoted to the pursuit of prayers, and to point out that a fulfilling and meaningful life needs a higher goal and purpose, which is referred to in this verse as Shreyas. The words may be different. Here we are using two traditional Sanskrit terms, Prayas and Shreyas. But I think that all religions in our world, in one way or the other, speak of these two goals and speak of the differences between these two goals. The fundamental insight is that life is more than wealth. These are necessary, but life is more than wealth, shelter, food, clothing, power, and even good health. The problem with prayers in Katha Upanishad, and Yama spells this out very clearly, but it's also discussed in other sacred texts, is that though it brings us pleasure, that pleasure is always short-lived and leaves us wanting more. There's also the danger of addiction. I remember my friend, the economist Jeffrey Sachs, speaking of the United States as suffering from what he calls an epidemic of addictions. I'm quoting him, an epidemic of addictions, leaving a significant portion of Americans unhappy and, in fact, clinically depressed. And these addictions, as he spelled them out, include, of course, drugs, alcohol, gambling, shopping. He added digital media, social network, and sex. It is in part the outcome of a society that makes prayers the only goal of life, the singular goal of life. We find the insight also reiterated in Bhagavad Gita, cautioning us that all the pleasures of prayers have a beginning and an end, and can be sources of suffering if their limits are not understood. So in this Katha Upanishad verse, the wise person, called here Dhira, is the one who carefully considers these two, Samparityatau Dhira Vivinakti, and prioritizes Shreyas over prayers. Nachiketa understood the difference when he told his teacher, in words that I quoted before, that a human being would not be satisfied by wealth alone. Na vittena tarpaniya manushyo. We will always yearn for something more. And this ancient insight of Katha Upanishad, na vittena tarpaniyo manushyo, that the human being will not be satisfied by wealth alone. This insight is confirmed even by our empirical studies. Using the United States as an example, the tripling of incomes since 1960, this is a statistical fact, has not translated into greater personal well-being, into greater happiness. In other words, and this is the point, more prayers does not mean more human well-being or happiness. The exclusive pursuit of prayers not only causes us suffering, but also distorts our relationships with our fellow beings. When we make personal pleasure, prayers, our only goal, we see other human beings as instrumental to our own pleasure, existing solely for our own use. They have no intrinsic worth or dignity and value which evokes our respect and reverence. People are treated like disposable objects, discarded, when they no longer serve our personal pleasure-driven desires. Relationships lack depth, meaning, and significance. And I must add, not only does the exclusive pursuit of prayers diminish the significance of human relationships, but religious traditions also get corrupted. When we turn to our religion solely to deliver the goods of prayers, such as increased wealth, power, and success in the world. There is too much of this already happening across our religious traditions, with promises that turning to the divine results in better bank accounts and in more items of luxury. God has become, for too many, a divine godfather. Prayers is necessary for a good life. I have said this. But prayers alone will not satisfy us or enable us to truly flourish and to attain lasting well-being, we need more than food, shelter, and clothing. We need a higher purpose and meaning in life. Shreyas. This is what Shreyas is. It's that higher purpose and meaning. The word Shreyas comes from the root Shri, which we know very well. Shri means beautiful, excellent. Now, some of you might be familiar with, it's a very famous study. It's, most students in undergraduate college education in one course or the other would encounter the research of Abraham Maslow, who was an American psychologist and who spoke of a hierarchy of human needs arranged like a pyramid. So the first level are basic needs, such as described already: food, clothing, shelter, health. Above that is the need for safety, freedom from violence and discrimination. That's the second rung. The third rung is of the pyramid is the need for meaningful human relationships in family, in community. The fourth is the need for self-esteem and value, which Maslow understood to be fulfilled through good, productive work. But interestingly, Maslow added later in his life another need. He realized that the needs that he had started off with did not circumscribe what human beings needed. And later on, he added a higher need. And he called this, interesting language coming from a psychologist, he called this the need for transcendence, the need for going towards the infinite. The need for transcendence, the need for going towards the infinite. And I think that Maslow was identifying exactly what this Katha Upanishad verse calls Shreyas. The need for transcendence, the need for the infinite. A need, the fulfillment of which is integral to human well-being. So if I used Maslow's language, the need for the infinite, going towards the infinite, this is an excellent description of what Shreyas is. A higher purpose in life, the higher purpose in life that is described in our Upanishads. The word Brahman, as you may indeed know, means the limitless, the infinite. And the Upanishads are centered on the nature of Brahman, the nature of the infinite. Just to give one example, in Taittiriya Upanishad, the student Bhrigu goes to his teacher Varuna and asks, "Teach me about the infinite." Adhihi bhagavo brahmeti. And then his teacher says, "It is that from which all these beings are born, that because of which after birth they live, and that into which after death they enter. That is the infinite. And that you should seek to know." It is the universal teaching of the Upanishads that in the absence of Shreyas, human life will lack an ingredient that is necessary for an enduring well-being in this world. And the infinite alone can satisfy this deepest human want. Prayers will always keep us wanting more. There's so many examples in these sacred texts. Kaṭha Upanishad puts it as clear as it could be said. And there's a beautiful verse in the 6th chapter where the teacher says, and I'm quoting now, only when people will be able to roll up the sky like a piece of leather, roll up the sky like a piece of leather, will sorrow come to an end without first knowing the infinite God. And Chandogya Upanishad makes the same point in different words. Yo vai bhuma tat sukham na alpe. That which is infinite is the source of enduring joy, not the finite. Sukhamasti bhumaeva. The infinite is the place of human fulfillment. The pursuit of Shreyas, the higher goal of life, does not make prayas irrelevant or unnecessary. Does not make prayers unnecessary or irrelevant. It is Shreyas, however, that ensures that we strive for prayers in ways that do not cause harm to ourselves and to our fellow beings. So in other words, we could think of Shreyas as regulating prayers. It is in the light of the higher end, the higher purpose, that we understand the purpose and limits of prayers. We understand wealth as a means to a higher purpose and not as an end in itself. Without a higher purpose, wealth becomes an end in itself. Wealth is good and necessary, but in the light of Shreyas, we can see it as having only instrumental value. If we see it as an end in itself, there are no limits to our pursuit, and we distort and we corrupt what it means to be human and what it means to be a human in a community of other living beings. It is the vision of Shreyas that enables us to see this and to achieve the right balance in life. In the absence of the perspective of Shreyas, we may think, as this verse teaches us, that yoga Shemad Vrinite, that wealth alone is necessary. That's all I need in life. Shreyas helps us, in other words, to set our priorities well between those lower and the higher end. The instrumental and the intrinsic goals of human existence. We must not pursue prayers without the wisdom of Shreyas. And at the same time, I may add, we must avoid the pursuit of Shreyas in ways that negativizes prayers and sees wealth or life in the world as inherently bad and evil. That's another extreme. It is a misunderstanding of Shreyas to think that it requires that we turn away from the world, from human relationships that include social relationships and good work. And you can see that in the case of Maslow, when towards the end of his life, he saw the need to add a higher goal. It was not a higher goal that made the earlier goals unnecessary. It was a higher goal that brought deeper meaning to the lower goals and deeper fulfillment to human life. So our challenge is to find that proper balance between Shreyas and prayers, between life's lower purposes and ordering these priorities properly. In principle, if we set our priorities properly, there should be no conflict between prayers and Shreyas, between our material well-being and our spiritual growth, between our individual lives and our lives in communities. This, I believe, I can now go back for a moment to conclude to the first verse that we meditated upon in this series. Because this, I believe, is exactly what this verse, opening verse of Isha Upanishad, was telling us, was teaching us. You remember that verse? I quoted it at the beginning of this meditation. Isha Vasyam idam sarvam. All that exists in this world of change is in God. Give up and enjoy. Tena tyaktena bhunjita. Do not covet another's wealth. Ma grida kasya svidhanam. So now look at this verse in the light of what the Katha Upanishad reveals to us about Shreyas and Preyas. We see these two goals in this verse. How do we see them? Everything that exists in this world of change is covered by God. Shreyas. It begins with Shreyas, the higher purpose, to see everything in the one infinite divine. So the opening line focuses on Shreyas, the invitation to see the world within the infinite one. So this is the understanding of the infinite. The second line speaks of Preyas. So this understanding liberates us from greed and deepens our enjoyment of the world. Whatever we pursue, whatever other goals we pursue, we can do so in freedom from greed. We do not run from the world. We can enjoy it with wisdom. We do not run away from human relationships. These relationships, in fact, because we understand everything to be in the divine and the divine in everything. Ma grida kasya svidhanam. We are not envious of another's success, of another's wealth. Our relationships can have depth. They can be profound. They can be meaningful. They can have value because we can now share the joys and sorrows of others. So we avoid the extremes of materialism, the extremes of prayers, and also we avoid the extreme of world rejection. We can live in the world with wisdom, recognizing that we have needs that must be satisfied, but we have a deeper, fundamental need that only the infinite can satisfy. And this is the wisdom of this Katha Upanishad verse that I wanted to share with you in today's satsang. I will stop here, and in the few minutes left, I will receive your questions, your reflections on what we have discussed today.
This reminds me of a number of ideas Sri Krishna proposes in the Daivasara Sampad Vibhava Yoga. Would you agree? A number of ideas.
Yes, I think that this distinction or the twofold goals of Shreyas and Preyas appear in various ways, as I said, not only in other Hindu texts like the section of the Bhagavad Gita that you mentioned, but I want to say that it's a fundamental distinction that we find across the spiritual traditions of our world. So I would certainly agree with you, Prasanna.
Yeah. There is this notion, a cursory reading of this particular verse leads one to believe that we have choices to make always, and better to make the choice of prayers, Shreyas versus prayers. But there are also occasions where we don't want to do anything. We're happy the way we are. The status quo is good enough. Would that be an acceptable attitude in life? Or should we always be either in one lane or the other lane? Could I just stop where I am and not pursue either one?
Well, I don't think you have a choice in some ways. Certainly, you don't have a choice as far as prayers is concerned, because every one of us, whatever our other wishes might be, we have certain basic needs for food, clothing, shelter, work, and Maslow would say, for human relationships. So I think in one sense, we don't have much choice as far as prayers is concerned. Prayers is necessary for the very fact of our survival in the world. I think the choice comes with prayers. Yeah. And many, perhaps some would say too many, stop with prayers. And even though prayers, I think this is a fundamental insight, that even though prayers it's called prayers because it makes life pleasant. And that's why I'm emphasizing, we should not negativize it. It makes life pleasant. It's necessary for life going well in this world. But the insight that the Upanishad offers to us is that if we are not awake, if we are not critical in our discernment of the limits of prayers, our life will, at some point in time, we'll discover a lack of fulfillment in life. So this is what Nachiketa said, na vitlina tarpaniya manusya. There's something in a human being, about the human being, that it means that, we will not be satisfied with well-thrown. Another great teacher, who's, this is a very special time in the written tradition. And I say this for John, because I know John will recognize this famous text, because I think it echoes in a similar way, John, what Nachiketa said. And this is that the human being shall not live by bread alone.
Yeah. This brings me to a very personal story. One of my colleagues, Professor Robert Lambert, passed away on Monday. He was 99, and he had all the academic accolades that you could think of. Extremely well-read, well-respected, great researcher. And I used to talk to him. He was in an assisted living facility. I used to talk to him almost every week. And we used to discuss a number of things. And then he told me once, all of these achievements that you were talking about in terms of being member of the academy, being a distinguished professor, etc., they're okay, but that's not the end of life. That's not the end of life. He didn't elaborate further, but I could see that while these things were satisfying, but there was something that was still missing. And he found, I think, what the missing piece was towards the end of his life. And he passed away peacefully in sleep. So while prayers is absolutely important, necessary, as you correctly emphasized, that we should take the time out to concentrate, also think about Shreyas. If we exclude Shreyas, prayers means nothing.
Prasanna, I am so grateful that you shared this story, even though you've lost a dear friend. But I think the story is a really profound example of what this text is teaching us. And the Upanishad is very patient and affirms that at some point in time, any thoughtful human being will come to this understanding.
Yes, agree.
Thank you, Prasanna.
And I've found your meditation to be totally inspiring and to shed light in ways that I have not heard before. And it brought me to this thought that there are components of prayers. The ones I have in mind are love, beauty, and immersion in nature. That if you really delve into them, can bring you in the direction of Shreyas, even if you have never thought of Shreyas before, that they can be door openers.
I agree with you very much, my friend John. I think that especially the experience of nature. I think nature is one of the places, one of the spaces which has that powerful inspiration to awaken us to the transcendent.
Yeah.
And I am always deeply inspired in those sacred spaces. Nature itself is sacred, and awakens us to the sacred. And I think, Johnny, one of the sad things about our contemporary lives is that when we live in places, and sometimes it's unavoidable, but I think it's still sad when we live more and more in spaces where we don't have the encounters with the natural world that you describe. I think something dies within us, if I would put it in that way. A sensibility fails to thrive and to grow. So I agree with you fully, and thank you for that comment.
I have a question.
Mayana, please go
Hello.
ahead.
Namaste. Yeah, I was thinking so many of our texts, the Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita and everything, keep pointing back and forth to the same messages. And, all of a sudden when you were speaking on Preyas and Shreyas, I thought of Satchit Ananda. So you can never reach Ananda part if you have not gone beyond the Preyas. Because you're meeting all your needs, you're probably even doing a lot of charitable works and et cetera, so many things, but you still haven't gone past that worldly life or the material life. So Shreyas becomes so important, and without reaching that or at least attempting, you will never get to that bliss, the unlimited nature of bliss. So, and I really liked that you brought in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I learned that in my freshman year in psychology class. So it was nice.
No, I agree with your comment fully. Naina, you put it very nicely on connecting Shreyas with Ananda in that famous Satchidananda formula. I was quite pleased, so I went back to Maslow as I was thinking about this text, and I didn't know that later in life he had added this fifth need that he spoke about, need for transcendence, the journey to the infinite. I was pleasantly surprised because he has been so influential, as you said. We all read him. But he brought in the need for spirituality that is also central to the human well-being.
Anand?
Yes, Shashi, please.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I enjoyed it. And I think I enjoyed the typical Indian way of expressing greeting is namaste, where bringing both the left and right hands together. So you're bringing both the Shreyas and Preyas had to be going on hand in hand to make sure that you achieve the ultimate goals. And one other thing which I wanted to emphasize from the Sanskrit language point of view is for us to differentiate between short Shri and long Shri. The Shreyas that we are talking about comes from the short Shri, coming from to cause, to lean, to rest upon. That is where the Shreyas come from, Nishreyas come from, Ashraya comes from. Because most of the people who confuse Shri and long Shri talk about Shri is the goddess of prosperity, wealth, and whatnot. So I just wanted to separate Sanskrit short Shri as against the long Shri. So let's not get confused, but enjoyed it very much, putting all the things together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shashi, for that comment on the difference between the short E and the long E. Yes. Anand, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I looked at Maslow's hierarchy, and I did not know that he added something toward the end of his life.
Yes.
But one thing is how you represent that triangle. If it is thought of as, I have to first satisfy, at the bottom of the triangle, I have to first satisfy, let's say, step 1. And then I go to step 2, and then I go to step 3, etc., etc. By the time you come to the top of it, first of all, many people would never reach the top, possibly. And then if we say, then comes Shreyas, well, that may not be the best way to think of it. It may be that we want to somehow find a way that Shreyas is there as a concept, as an idea, as a goal, right from the beginning, in other words. Once your absolutely basic needs, food, shelter, etc., are satisfied, it's almost like, could it be somehow related to dharma? We say that, yes, we want to have shelter, we want to have food, etc., but we want to achieve all those in a dharmic way. You don't want to do bad things in the process of accomplishing even that basic necessity, so that the dharma is there throughout the triangle. It's almost like it is a screen on which that triangle is being projected. So it's just a thought that how does one bring this in, and what kind of visual might accompany it? Yes.
Well, thank you for that comment, first of all, Anand. And I think that, if let's just go back just a moment to what you hinted at, which is the 4 goals of life as articulated, across the Hindu traditions, Artha, Kama, Dharma. You lifted up Dharma and Moksha. So surely the answer is yes. And precisely why, in fact, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Dharma is first in the list.
Right.
Dharma is, so that I think points exactly to what you were saying, that all of our pursuits of Artha covers a lot of what Maslow says. Artha and Kama covers a lot of what he says. But all of these, as you quite rightly indicated, with which I agree, must be informed deeply and pursued in accordance with Dharma. Now, I agree with you also that these goals, even Artha, Kama, Dharma, Moksha, ideally are not pursued in a chronological order. In other words, that the achievement of one is not contingent on the achievement of the one that has preceded it. I think the vision is a holistic vision in which all of these goals are pursued simultaneously, because they are all necessary for our well-being. And that's why I was emphasizing in my meditation with you that one should not understand Shreyas in a way that denigrates prayers, and at the same time one should not make prayers an exclusive pursuit. But it is also true, Anand, and I think we have to acknowledge that, because we see it in life, that sometimes this verse is speaking about the thoughtful person, and the word there is a dhiraha, the thoughtful person. It is interesting that this particular verse occurs in Katha Upanishad, which is another way of, responding to your question. Because here the seeker, the searcher, is a young man, Nachiketas, who we can surely say doesn't come to the quest having achieved a lot of wealth or experiencing pleasure in the world, but he comes to the quest because he's a thoughtful young man. And his question is coming from his deep. One doesn't have to necessarily accumulate a lot of wealth to appreciate the limits of wealth, although in some cases that seems to be necessary. People might not come to that kind of critical reflective unless they actually achieve the goal. But I agree with your comment, and I think that it is not intended that these goals be achieved in any consecutive manner, because, as you said, it may leave time for little else. I think they're all holistic, especially in the Hindu tradition, and it is the wisdom of whatever we might call the goal. It is the wisdom of Shreyas that gives. It helps us to moderate prayers, if I might introduce that word, to pursue prayers in moderation and with intelligence. And same if we speak of moksha, it is the vision of moksha that then adds depth and meaning both to dharma, artha, and kama. So I think, thank you for that comment. I think it's very helpful.
I had one other thing, which was that you mentioned that the incomes have tripled, but people's happiness hasn't gone any place, has not increased. And that seems to be that, happiness is not measured on some kind of absolute scale. It seems like happiness is a relative assessment. Presumably people are happy if they're doing better than the rest of the gang around them. If everybody goes up, if all of us had huts before, and now we have big houses, happiness doesn't change because happiness is relative. And so long as we continue to think that way, there is no way that we can achieve happiness. We have to fundamentally, I'm not saying anything different. We have to fundamentally change the way we usually look at happiness.
But
these studies are very interesting, Anand. And one could see, how they measured or what they were measuring. They are available. It's a good area to look further into. I remember from some of these papers that, and I want to be accurate, I think the figure that was identified was 75,000. After the achievement of an income of about 75,000, this may indeed change, as you said, as with inflation and other factors. But the studies, when they were done, identified a figure of $75,000 as not significantly enhancing a person's internal sense of well-being. So how, the exact indices that were used for measurement may be there, but this is the insight, which is, as you said, it does accord with what is a fundamental, I think, insight of our religious traditions, that wealth goes only so far.
Right.
In terms of its relationship to human flourishing and human well-being. That fundamental is the fundamental insight, and I think that has endured.
Yeah.
There are very interesting statistics on lifespan that I think bear on this domain. It's been known for a long time that the average lifespan in this society of churchgoers is 3 or 4 or 5 years higher than for non-churchgoers, because that has been true for a long time. And people have asked, well, why should that be? Right? And exactly how it relates to happiness, the studies don't say, but they do argue that the critical life-enhancing factor of attending a church is not primarily the theology. It is primarily the companionship.
Yes, Johnny. That is indeed what I've also learned from my own reading, the significance of the social relationship dimension in human well-being. Yes, and it also points, for another large discussion on the relationship again between emotional well-being, mental well-being, and physical well-being. I think that these flow into each other. They are not, and I should add spiritual, the spiritual and the physical, the emotional and the physical, the mental and the physical, the way in which They're also deeply interrelated. Just one last point, and because we're out of time. I was involved in an interesting course, an interesting project that was, and again, I mentioned this, Anand, because we're speaking about how these goals are achieved progressively or not. A course was offered at Yale University on the good life, inviting students to think about what is it that really constitutes the good life. And that course became one of the most successful and oversubscribed courses at the university. Every student was interested in that, in thinking critically about the good life. There are a couple of books coming out in the near future. But it was such a basic question. Sometimes we underestimate young people's interest in these fundamental questions, but they all wanted to see. And it wasn't centered on one religious tradition. It was an exploration of the good life as understood across the world's spiritual traditions. And the classes could not hold the students who wanted to explore that question. In some ways, that's exactly what we were exploring today. Which I don't leave today without realizing that what the Upanishad is speaking about Shreyas and Prayas is really an attempt to define for us as human beings what is the good life. What is the good life? So let me conclude now with prayer and wish all of you a wonderful week ahead, and hopefully here in Minnesota we might see a warming of our weather. I'm not sure, maybe the warming of the weather falls under the category of prayers, but I'm not saying that it is not necessary for our happiness in the world. So thank you all, and thank you all for your rich comments and enriching the discussion with your own insights and thoughts. This is what makes it so meaningful and such a joy to be in satsang together. Thank you.